We'd just finished putting together the previous episode of this series when I got an excited text at 7 a.m. from our producer, Estelle, saying that Tadashi Sasaki is willing to talk to us.
You heard about Tadashi Sasaki in the last episode. He's the guy who was working with a Sri Lankan charity, the one that was lined up to receive $20 million of stolen Bangladesh Bank money. That transaction got reversed because of a one-letter spelling error.
When we first started researching this, I didn't even think that Tadashi Sasaki was a real person. I thought it was a fake persona set up to trick the charity into accepting the money. It turns out not only is he real, he now wants to have a Zoom call with us. So the day after we released episode 8, I found myself speaking to him. It's the first on-record interview he's ever done.
Hello.
Hello.
通訳 Japanese.
Yes, we have an
Please-
interpreter here who can
Please speaking Japanese.
speak Japanese to you. Yes, so I will ask the
Yes.
questions in English.
So far, all we'd had was an email from Tadashi Sasaki denying knowing anything about the incident.
But on our Zoom call, he told us he was involved. He was actually pretty chatty about the details.
いや、今、本来はミャンマーに車を輸出してたんですけども、それで、あとはまあいろいろと。
Sasaki-san says he's a businessman. He's director of a company selling secondhand cars to Myanmar, and he does some business consulting.
Can you talk us through what you remember from being in Sri Lanka?
これはですね、ある日本の方からスリランカ。
Mr. Sasaki tells us that back in 2014, he's in Japan when he's approached by a fellow Japanese with an unusual request. Does he know anyone who could receive a large amount of money from a bank in Switzerland using a particular niche type of money transfer system called a depository transfer check?
And the amount they were planning to transfer?
1ビリオンユーロとかそんなんですよ。1ビリオン。
That's right, about 1 billion euros, which is more than $1 billion US dollars.
So Mr. Sasaki was asked to help with the transfer of over $1 billion. The hackers who broke into Bangladesh Bank were originally trying to transfer $1 billion. Perhaps their original plan was to transfer all the money via Sri Lanka.
And that makes sense, because think of all the hassle they had transferring it via the Philippines. Most of their transactions got reversed. They had to launder it through the casinos, and they had to pay people off. It sounds so much easier to me if they could just have sent it all to a Sri Lankan bank.
1 billion euros is more than $1 billion. Did you not think that this was very suspicious? That is a huge amount of money.
ありましたけど、まあ結局私も。
Yes, he says, but he claims that at the time he didn't understand the intricacies of the international financial system.
まあもしこれが。
Sasaki-san says he was just thinking, if this goes well, I'll make a lot of money.
What were you told about what this money from Switzerland was for?
細かいことはまあ投
He
資
says they didn't explain what it was for, just that it was some kind of investment.
Mr. Sasaki's told if he helps out with the transfer, he'll get a 1% fee, which may not sound that great, but from $1 billion, that's millions. The kind of sum that'll set you up for life.
ね、みんなお金欲しいですから。
We all want money, he says. He also says he thought the Swiss bank looked reputable, and he just assumed that they had all the relevant checks in place.
So, Mr. Sasaki asks around, and another Japanese acquaintance puts him in touch with a man in Sri Lanka who can help with this transfer. But when he gets to Sri Lanka, Mr. Sasaki's told the money isn't going direct to a recipient, but needs to go via a charity instead. The charity will get to keep 30%. The recipient gets the rest, minus the fee for Mr. Sasaki and the others helping out with the transfer. I know, moving a giant amount of cash like this via a charity is a massive red flag for money laundering, something Mr. Sasaki seemingly missed.
The charity that ends up involved in this scheme is, of course, the Shalika Foundation, run by Shalika Pereira. She's the Sri Lankan woman you heard in the last episode.
それはだからシャリカファンデーションの名義なんじゃないですかね。ちょっとそこまでよく確認しなかったですけど。
Mr. Sasaki says he met Shalika in Sri Lanka and even went to the bank with her. They were trying to get the bank to receive the $1 billion via this depository transfer check system, but Sasaki says the bank couldn't make it work. And I'm not surprised at that. I spoke to a money laundering expert who told me that these depository transfer checks are a pretty old-fashioned way of transferring funds, and they're also a big money laundering concern. For example, Unlike normal checks, these ones don't even carry a signature, so it's really hard for investigators to track who authorised the payment.
Sasaki says that when he realized the transfer couldn't happen, he left Sri Lanka and that was that. But that's not how Shalika tells it. She tells police that he later contacted her about the transfer, which was now no longer $1 billion, but the much smaller sum of $20 million US.
Why did the hackers bother making that $20 million transfer to Sri Lanka? We don't know. Maybe they needed to pay some people off.
And as we know, the transfer was reversed, so the money never went through.
So what happens is someone asks you to find someone who can receive money in a particular way. You go to Sri Lanka to meet somebody you don't know. There's going to be $1 billion transferred from a Swiss bank account, and you're going to receive 1% of this. And at no stage did you ask questions about how legitimate this was. Are you still fit to be a director of a company?
結局ですね、これ送金するスイスの銀行と
Sasaki says that, yes, at first he did have some doubts about whether it was legitimate or not, but that he trusted the bank to have a system in place to detect anything illegal.
But I still had questions for him. Given what we learned in the previous episodes, does he have any links to Japanese organised crime, the Yakuza?
全くないです。
None at all, he says. And what does he make of the fact that the FBI now suspects North Korea's behind the heist?
考えですか？考えはまあ、ね、いろんなところから経済制裁を受けている国
He
がやっぱりいろん
says
な
it seems to him that North Korea has been resorting to many different ways to bring in hard currency in the face of economic sanctions, and Sasaki-san says he finds that scary.
I asked him about the people who had originally got him involved in the scheme in Sri Lanka, his fellow Japanese guys. He says both of them are now dead. He also says he's fallen out of touch with his Sri Lankan contact. All his leads and connections turned into dead ends.
But it's something we've seen again and again in this investigation. The people on the ground who help spirit this money away seem to vanish.
Around the globe, there are people apparently working for North Korea who do their part and then just slip away from the authorities and disappear, like smoke.
From the BBC World Service, this is The Lazarus Heist. I'm Jean Lee.
And I'm Jeff White. Episode 9, The Macau Connection. Manila, capital of the Philippines. It's March 2016, and on the second floor of an imposing government building, there's a big wood-panelled room. Inside, about 50 people are seated in a square facing off against each other. The atmosphere's tense. News cameras roll, journalists' pens twitch. There's someone constantly bobbing about giving everyone bottles of cold water, but that's not helping keep the temperature down.
The Philippine Senate is trying to get to the bottom of how $81 million was laundered through the country's banks and casinos. It's a grinding, frustrating process. The committee is grilling everyone, and everyone is passing the buck. The witnesses keep contradicting one another and themselves. Chairman Teofista Gingona is running out of patience.
Hearing after hearing after hearing, you have contradicted yourself. And remind you, I think you are facing a lot of problems. I don't think you should add to your problems by giving false testimony.
And then a key witness breaks his silence, and he drops a name.
Swa Hua Gao. Huh? Swa Hua Gao.
Yeah, it takes a little while to get that name right.
Swa Hua Gao.
Swa Gao.
Senator
I
Smith.
think for the record, the family name should be the one that we use. Gao, di ba?
Gao, opo.
G-A-O.
O.
Okay.
Gao Shuhua, and he also gives another name, Ding Zheze.
Ding Sisi. Ding Sisi. Yung sinasabi po nung...
The man testifying is Kim Wong. We heard about him in a previous episode. He was the Filipino-Chinese casino operator who gave back the $16 million of stolen Bangladesh bank money that he'd ended up with. Charges against him were eventually dropped, but at the committee hearing, he's under pressure to explain how he ended up involved in this whole thing.
These two Chinese nationals, Gao and Ding, he says, are the brains behind the laundering of the $81 million stolen from the Bangladesh bank. They're the ones who opened the fake accounts to receive the stolen money, and he says they're the ones who laundered the cash through casinos before disappearing.
Thousands of miles away, a financial journalist in the US is listening to the hearing, and his ears prick up. This is just the lead he's been looking for.
The thing that struck me as soon as this hack happened was, okay, how are they going to get the money? So tracking that part of the crime was what really interested me.
Alan Katz works for Bloomberg News, where he heads a financial investigations team. For Alan, Kim Wong's testimony leaves as many questions as it does answers.
Well, it seems odd, doesn't it? Like if you have allegedly a North Korean hacking group going after money in Bangladesh, moving it through the New York Fed to the Philippines, where do these Chinese guys come into this? Like what are they doing there and why?
So, together with a colleague, Alan starts to slowly piece together what he can on these men, Gao and Ding. China's got its fair share of officialdom, so they manage to find all sorts of court reports, property records, company documents, birth registrations. They even track down their friends and family who agree to speak to them.
And one thing quickly becomes clear. Gao and Ding are not cyber geniuses. According to those close to them, Gao was basically computer illiterate, and Ding was such a tech novice he needed help posting selfies when he went out on hiking trips.
But Alan Katz says this wouldn't have mattered. The Lazarus Group had their own people to do the hack.
But they're not involved necessarily in, or not skilled necessarily even in how to actually launder the money and get it back into the real world. Other people are skilled in that side of things.
People like Gao and Ding.
Gao was the hard man in this. He was big in the Chinese illegal gambling world. So China does not allow casinos, but he ran illegal casinos in China, and he was known as a wealthy man.
So one summer, according to court documents, thugs working for Gao beat up a group of men whom they mistook for another gang that had robbed them. The victims turned out to include police, and Gao found himself serving an 18-month prison sentence.
And like Gao, Ding was also a big wheel in the casino world.
And Ding definitely made good money from this. He and his wife, they ended up buying this big mansion. And in fact, they were robbed at one point, and they had more than $600,000 worth of items stolen from their house. And that included 2 Swiss watches, a kilo of gold. But they also had about $25,000 in cash at the house. And I don't know about you, but I certainly don't have that kind of money.
Running illegal gambling operations was Gao and Ding's main business, according to Katz's research. So they were
used to moving large sums of money on behalf of other people. And that's the point, was moving money for other people, whether it's illegal or not.
Gao and Ding were another key part of the Bangladesh bank heist. They knew how to move things without leaving a trace, like cash and themselves. They managed to leave the Philippines with $50 million without leaving any record.
So where did they go with the money? It turns out that before the hack, both Gao and Ding were based in the same Chinese city, Macau.
It's a city like no other, through which we enter into the dangerous world of organized crime. How does it operate? Who runs this world? And what is the link between Macau and North Korea? Could this be where the heist's money trail leads back to the regime? I've been to Macau, and it's absolutely fascinating. It's this slice of old Europe in New Asia, with beautiful crumbling colonial architecture, dates back to the 17th century, mixed in with that hustle and bustle of modern-day China. So you go from bumping your way through Chinese seafood markets that are teeming with all kinds of fish I can't even begin to name, to kicking back with a glass of vino verde under the shade of palm trees to escape that tropical heat.
And if you're wondering why people go to Macau for Vino Verde, it's because the city used to be a booming trading outpost for the Portuguese. But things started going downhill when Hong Kong emerged as a better deep water port and started eating Macau's lunch.
So what was Macau to do? Macau got into all of the commercial dark arts, and that became its raison d'etre. Gold bullion trading was illegal in the rest of the world. It was done in Macau. Prostitution was legal in Macau. Smuggling was huge in Macau. All these things were specialties in Macau.
Mohammed Cohen is a former long-time Macau resident. He's also a casino expert and editor-at-large of Inside Asian Gaming magazine.
And of course, the biggest of the dark arts that they capitalized on was gambling,
leading the city to become
the biggest casino market in the world. 5 times bigger than the Vegas Strip in a bad year.
To put that in perspective, in 2019 the Las Vegas Strip generated under $7 billion. Macau, $35 billion.
Today, Macau's the only place in China where casinos are allowed. And it's where Asia's nouveau riche go to indulge their vices. And it has a long history of shady dealings.
Macau kind of evokes the Casablanca from the Humphrey Bogart movie, especially before the Portuguese handed it back to China. The Portuguese administration in Macau was notoriously incompetent, inefficient, and corrupt. And basically anything went.
This is Mike Chinoy. He was CNN's correspondent based in Hong Kong for many years, and Macau was part of his beat. And he covered China's version of the mafia, called the Triads.
So triad gangsters were very visible and very active. I remember in the mid-late 90s, there was a gangland war between rival triad factions because you'd wake up and there would be, yet somebody else got bumped off outside a casino.
But when Macau was handed back to China at the turn of the millennium, the Beijing government essentially told the triads to sort themselves out, and they became more discreet, those gangs. But Mohammed Cohen says organised crime never went away, because Macau's massive gambling industry created a need for it.
In China, there's no legal recourse for collecting a gambling debt. So if you want to collect a gambling debt, you have to do it through extra-legal means, which may mean dealing with organized crime, to have somebody come threaten the debtor, and things like that.
But Macau isn't just a freewheeling casino mecca with a murky past. It's a key link connecting the isolated state of North Korea with the outside world. It's no coincidence that as we've investigated North Korea's suspected crimes, so many of the threads of our story converge on Macau and its gambling dens. And there's one character who encapsulates every element of this story: North Korea, Macau, gambling, and crime. It's time for the incredible story of Kim Jong-nam.
As you might guess from his name, Kim Jong-nam was born into the ruling Kim family, the eldest son of leader Kim Jong-il and a North Korean actress. And while North Korea was poor, Kim Jong-nam was raised like a prince. Diplomats were ordered to buy diamond watches, gold-plated guns, even a miniature Cadillac for him. He was dressed up in the uniform of a high-ranking marshal, and generals were ordered to salute him. This is all according to a cousin who was raised in the palace with him, but later defected to South Korea. But instead of keeping him in Pyongyang, Kim Jong-il sent his eldest son off to Moscow and Geneva to be educated, and this gave him a taste of the outside world. And when he returned, the name Kim Jong-nam began appearing in state media, and these were sure signs that he was being prepared for leadership. But he itched for fun, and he itched for freedom.
And that would be his downfall. In 2001, by then he was married and a father, Kim Jong-nam fancied taking his son to Tokyo Disneyland. Trying to fly under the radar? Not literally, he used a fake ID, a Dominican Republic passport bearing a Chinese name that translates into Fat Bear. Kim Jong-nam was quite a corpulent guy. Honestly, we're not making this up. Japanese authorities spotted the fake passport and arrested Kim Jong-nam. The incident went public and was hugely embarrassing for the North Koreans. After all, here was the presumed future communist leader of the country chasing a big dose of capitalist fun time in Disneyland, of all places.
So Kim Jong-nam went into self-exile. He's believed to have set his wife and son up to live in Beijing, but he ended up moving with his mistress and their children to, guess where? That's right, Macau. And the fact that he ended up in Macau is no coincidence.
So there is a track record going back several decades of North Korea using Macau as an important base for a variety of illicit activities.
As well as being CNN's correspondent in Hong Kong, Mike Chinoy visited North Korea several times. We even had dinner together there once at his hotel when he was there to run in the Pyongyang Marathon. So he's familiar with North Korea and Macau, and he says that starting in the 1970s,
the North Koreans began to set up a series of trading companies in Macau, staffed ostensibly by business people, but most of them had diplomatic passports. The most important was called the Zokwang Trading Company, and it had an office in this kind of grubby concrete building. On the surface, it was just doing conventional trading in, rubber and ginseng and so on, but it was also an organization that was responsible for buying and shipping luxury goods to Pyongyang for the use of the elite. TV sets, Hennessy cognac, fresh fruit, stuff like that.
So at one point, Kim Jong-il was Hennessy's #1 buyer of cognac. He racked up a tab of $800,000 per year in the 1990s, and I actually confirmed this amazing detail with Hennessy. It's not that he was drinking it all himself, to be clear, but he was doling it out to his court and the military to keep them happy.
The North Korean airline, Air Koryo, for a few years had a regular flight from Macau to Pyongyang. And I remember going with my camera crew and sitting on a hillside overlooking Macau airport. And you could just see boxes that were clearly, 49-inch television sets and God knows what else were being loaded on for the flight back to Pyongyang.
But this front company wasn't just shipping luxury goods into North Korea. It was also helping out with the country's criminal schemes. Those super dollars from episode 3, the fake $100 bills?
Several Zokwang executives were actually arrested after they deposited counterfeit US dollar notes at a bank in Macau called the Banco Delta Asia. And all of the people who were arrested carried diplomatic passports, so they just left Macau and never went to trial, and Zokwang remained in business.
But the links between Macau and North Korea aren't just financial.
The North Koreans also used Macau as a place where intelligence operatives could be trained in essentially how to pass for not being North Korean. The most notable example came in 1987.
Just before South Korea was due to host the Olympics, there was a horrific event.
Whatever happened to KAL Flight 858 happened so quickly that the pilots didn't have time to send an emergency Mayday message.
Liners has crashed somewhere over Southeast Asia with 115 people on board.
The conclusion for crowds waiting anxiously at Seoul Airport was that their friends and relatives had probably been the victims of a terrorist attack.
2 North Korean agents put a bomb on a South Korean airliner, which exploded, killing everyone on board.
The North Korean agents survived because they'd switched planes during a stopover before the bomb went off. As they fled, however, they were discovered to be using fake passports and they were picked up by the authorities. With the net closing in, they took drastic action.
One of the 2 took a cyanide pill and died, but the other one was captured before she could break open the pill.
Her name is Kim Hyun-hee. She eventually confesses and publicly apologizes, and she would later tell the BBC that she was initially full of pride in her mission.
I was told by a senior officer that before the Seoul Olympics, we would take down a South Korean airliner. He said it would create chaos and confusion in South Korea. The mission would strike a severe blow for the revolution. We were told we were contributing to bringing about the unification of Korea.
So Kim Hyun-hee is initially sentenced to death, but she's eventually pardoned by South Korea, which calls her the victim of brainwashing by the North Korean regime. And she eventually marries the South Korean agent who interrogated her and served as her bodyguard. She's now living quietly in the South Korean countryside.
And guess what? During her interrogation, she said she was connected to a particular company in Macau. She tells South Korean interrogators
that she and her partner had actually used the office of the Zokwang Trading Company in Macau as a base to learn the necessary skills, like how to shop in a supermarket or how to use a credit card, so they could pose as innocent tourists and travel around.
With all these links between the 2 countries, it's perhaps no surprise that Kim Jong-nam brother of North Korea's current leader Kim Jong-un, ended up in Macau when he fell out of favour. But what exactly is he doing there? Much the same as everyone else, it turns out.
Living Las Vegas in Asia. That's what Kim Jong-nam wrote under a pseudonym in a 2010 Facebook post. He was enjoying his freewheeling life in Macau, eating out, drinking, and dabbling in a little gambling. So his love of the nightlife in Macau was useful for journalists looking for insight into North Korea and a route into the reclusive Kim family, because they knew to lie in wait at the city's casinos if they wanted to score an interview.
It was an open secret when you went to Macau and talked to people. People would say, oh, this is where his house is. I remember going for lunch in an Italian restaurant and they said, oh, the casino in this restaurant is where Kim Jong-nam has run up large bills, which he never pays.
From the safety of Macau, he'd become increasingly critical of the North Korean regime. His views had been tolerated by Pyongyang, perhaps most importantly by his father. But then, in December 2011, their father died of a heart attack.
And his brother was now in charge, newly installed, insecure, and desperate to cement his position, none of which was good news for Kim Jong-nam.
They may be half-brothers, but actually these two men were raised separately. Kim Jong-nam once said he had never met his younger half-brother, Kim Jong-un.
Once Kim Jong-il died and Kim Jong-un took power, Kim Jong-nam became to be viewed as a threat.
By now you probably know how North Korea's leaders feel about threats. As Kim Jong-nam partied in Macau, an audacious plot was being hatched to shut him up for good.
Kuala Lumpur Airport, Malaysia, 9 a.m, 2015. An unremarkable-looking man is using the self-checking kiosk for a flight to Macau. A woman bumps into him and quickly smears something across his face. And as the man reels back in confusion, another woman darts in and rubs a cloth over his mouth. And then both women walk away very calmly, and no one seems to notice. The whole thing takes less than 5 seconds.
The man feels something's wrong, goes to the police, security staff lead him to the airport health clinic. By the time he gets there, he's dragging his feet, he's sweating. CCTV shows him slumped in a seat, barely conscious. Within 2 hours, he's dead.
It would later emerge that this man was traveling on a North Korean diplomatic passport with the name Kim Chol. Now, let me tell you, this is a name that's so common that I think of it as the North Korean equivalent of John Smith. The Malaysian authorities go to inform North Korea's embassy of the death of one of their citizens. But it seems they make a mistake. Instead, they call the South Koreans. And from there, the news leaks. Photos of the dead man slumped in a chair in an airport clinic shoot around the world, and it soon becomes clear who he really was, Kim Jong-nam.
Within days of the attack, the Malaysian police capture the two women responsible. They tell an incredible story. They both wanted to break into show business and said they were approached by a Japanese man with a very tempting offer to work on a YouTube prank show. They did a few stunts, spraying liquid at unsuspecting victims, and then the Japanese man gave them a new assignment. Go to Kuala Lumpur Airport, spray some liquid on a guy's face. It'll all be captured on camera. Just a bit of fun, they thought.
In fact, it was an assassination. So separately, these two liquids are harmless. But if you layer them, you get VX, the most toxic nerve agent ever created. It's a chemical weapon that can disable the nervous system in minutes. And toxicology reports reveal it was VX that killed Kim Jong-nam.
The two women are eventually released. One had her murder charge dismissed, the other pleaded guilty to a lesser charge. But Malaysian authorities had quickly discovered the women weren't acting alone at the airport.
Studying the CCTV footage, police spotted 4 North Koreans who were on the ground at the time of the attack. They flew out of the country shortly after, taking a circuitous airline route, which, investigators say, was designed to avoid any airspace where the planes could be forced down so that the men could be apprehended.
Within days, the Malaysian police were pointing fingers at North Korea. It brought an angry response from the regime, which firmly denied any involvement.
The incident sparked a massive diplomatic row. At one point, North Korea banned Malaysian citizens from leaving its territory, and Malaysia reacted by banning the North Koreans from leaving Malaysia.
Up until this point, the two countries have been on pretty good terms. So here's an intriguing question. If Kim Jong-nam was assassinated by North Korean agents, why didn't they do it in Macau, where he lived and where North Korea has long-established links? Why do it in Malaysia and risk alienating one of its few international friends?
Some say it's because North Korea didn't want to upset its main ally, China, which now controls Macau and has tightened its grip on the city. Mike Chinoy says North Korea has scaled back its operations there.
It's Beijing running the show. So the North Koreans, I think, have to be mindful of that. They don't want to wear out any welcome.
So where does this leave Gao Shuha and Ding Zhizhu, the two casino junket organisers who helped launder $50 million allegedly on behalf of North Korea? They had so many links in Macau, based there, worked there. What happened to them? Perhaps more importantly, what happened to the money? Alan Katz is the financial journalist who's been on their trail.
And so, did you ever actually get to Gao and Ding themselves?
No, we did not. And the reason is that it didn't actually end very well for them.
The last we heard of Gao and Ding was that they'd helped organise the gambling sessions in Manila, where Bangladesh Bank's stolen money was laundered, then quit town. What happened next?
They got away scot-free from the Philippines, but they reappeared in China. And by early 2017, both had been arrested. And the other thing that was odd about it was when they were taking Gao away, his wife asked one of the policemen, where should I tell the lawyer to call to try to either get him out on bail or to follow up on this. And the policeman said to her, oh, don't bother calling a lawyer. And that's a very odd response in lawyer, because China is actually quite a big believer in lawyers as a country.
It's worth noting that around the time that Gao and Ding are arrested, relations between North Korea and China are getting a little tense. And that's because in the months preceding their arrest, Kim Jong-un of North Korea had been ramping up the testing of ballistic missiles. And I do remember that around this time, we started to see signs that China was poised to crack down on North Korea. They wanted to stop this nuclear development. So could this be part of the reason why Gao and Ding are arrested?
Still don't know, really, why they were arrested. Someone decided that what they'd been doing, or appears to have decided that what they were doing in the Philippines was not to their liking. Possible they could have been involved in other projects that were also not to someone's liking, but that would be quite a coincidence.
It's not just the money melting through the cracks, it's the people too. This is how it goes in a scheme like this. Each of the players performs their function in the crime and then fades into the shadows, just like the Chinese gambling organisers, Gao and Ding.
Gao and Ding had a specific job to do, which was to launder the money through the casinos and get the money out of the Philippines, likely back to Macau. They were good enough at their job that they laundered the money and it became untraceable. But that was, I think, where their job ended. So the person who would then be getting the money from, if it was in Macau, to North Korea would have been a different set of people.
What happened to the $50 million? Truth is, we don't know. So many people we've interviewed for this series have presented so much evidence incriminating North Korea. There's no doubt in their minds that the money was stolen by the Pyongyang regime. But here's the thing. In order for the money to be used by North Korea, it doesn't necessarily need to arrive in North Korea.
If you gain money through illicit activity abroad and you use that money in a foreign bank to purchase what the regime needs in the country, there's no need to repatriate the money.
Stephanie Klein-Albrandt served on a UN panel tasked with detailing violations of UN sanctions on North Korea. It's a job she says got harder and harder over the years. Their reports keep getting longer, and the last one was more than 400 pages.
North Korea, it's like a cat and mouse game. They're always a bit ahead, and the resolutions are always trying to catch up.
So in the case of the Bangladesh bank money, one likely scenario is that the $50 million Gao and Ding brought back to Macau was spent there or nearby to buy goods that were then shipped back to North Korea.
Luxury goods for the elites, like the TV sets Mike Chinoy saw being loaded onto a plane, Rolex watches, perhaps even the Mercedes Benzes I saw so often in Pyongyang. And remember, it wasn't just about wooing the elites. The regime was also looking for the elements needed to build nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles, parts that they sourced abroad.
And to organise the purchase and transport of such goods,
one way they hide their on-paper links between North Korea and the activity is just to ensure that there's a front company which is registered in a different country.
And these companies would often be overseen by at least one North Korean official, and that person would be on a diplomatic passport, which, as we heard earlier, gives them immunity from prosecution. And even when the UN identifies these companies and the officials and puts them on the sanctions list,
you see the same names time and again popping up in panel of experts reports to the Security Council, the same names of agents that just flip identity, they become diplomats in another country. For example, people that used to be involved in procurement for weapons programs have morphed into those that are doing trade in coal and petroleum. And so they all just shift to the latest, most lucrative activity.
Like cyber theft. Gene, it's been a pretty wild ride. We've chased the heist so far and the folks behind it through Bangladesh, New York, Sri Lanka, the Philippines, Japan, Macau, and of course North Korea.
In so many ways, we have to admit it was a phenomenally successful attack. And if investigators are right, North Korea has taken bank heists into the 21st century.
And yet, looked at another way, it was a giant failure. And that's the problem with this kind of cybercrime, right? It starts out virtual and digital and clean. But sooner or later, things get messy. Because you're not dealing with code and numbers on a screen anymore. You're dealing with people and wads of cash. So, did the hackers pack up and go home? Not a bit of it. What we've learned about the Lazarus Group is that they're smart, they're resourceful, and they're quick learners. So they soon came up with a new plan, a way of maximising their profits by minimising the human input. Investigators watched as North Korea mastered a new, automated, and incredibly dangerous form of cyber attack. What comes next is perhaps the most frightening episode in hacking history, and would bring the threat much closer for many, many more people.
I then got up out of the bed and walked out to the nurses' station just to see blank monitors everywhere. Just black.
It was nothing I've ever seen before. It was just infections coming in the thousands per a few seconds. I was just completely shocked by the rate in which it was spreading. It was overwhelming.
The Lazarus Group's crime wave would become, quite literally, a matter of life and death.
That's next time on The Lazarus Heist.
The Lazarus Heist is an original podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Jeff White.
And I'm Jean Lee.
Thanks so much to everyone who's left us ratings and reviews and talked about the show. That really helps us get the word out. And do also please spread the word on social media. We're using the hashtag Lazarus Heist.
Thank you for listening.